there's an artist called Paul Sermon, chiefly associated with various kinds of digital and virtual work. But he made a series of pieces which were really interesting. They were installation pieces, so there were kind of spaces that you could walk in and walk around. And the characteristics of these spaces is that they had mirrors in them, so there'd be a kind of mock-up of a bathroom in this particular space, and on the wall there would be a mirror, or at least it looked like a mirror, because when you looked in it you could see all the fittings of the bathroom around you in mirror image. And there was a sign on the wall, I think, and the writing, which was also a mirror image of a sign that was on the wall of the bathroom you were standing in, and the writing on the reflected sign would be reversed. So it looked exactly like a mirror. The only odd thing about it was that if you stood in front of this mirror, you couldn't see yourself. You yourself were not reflected in this mirror. And the way that it was done is that it wasn't actually a mirror at all. It was an opening onto a room which was exactly the same in every detail but reversed. So there was an actual sign in that mirror, in that duplicate room, but the writing was reversed, and all the fittings, as I say, were also in this other room, the other way around. So there was a really, really convincing illusion of a mirror. But when you looked in it yourself, you weren't present. And apparently it was so convincing, this thing, that many people looked in the mirror and didn't even notice that they weren't reflected for a while. It was so people didn't get that that was happening in some cases. What was I talking about that for? Oh yeah. One of the reasons why I'm talking about that, I was just thinking about vampires, and of course that would be what it'd be like if you were a vampire in the bathroom. You would look down at your own body and you would see that you were there. You would see your feet and your legs and your torso and so on. But when you looked in the mirror, you wouldn't see yourself reflected there. Or so you wouldn't see yourself reflected. You would see what was behind you and what was around you. You'd see the room that you were in reflected, but you yourself wouldn't be present. And presumably if you were a vampire, you would also have that kind of internal sense. You would feel yourself to be present. And if you touched yourself, there you were. All your proprioceptive and interoceptive senses would be working. Presumably be able to hear yourself echoed off surfaces around you. But you wouldn't be able to see yourself. So it'll be a little bit like being in Paul Sermon's installation. There's something very funny about that. I think several things follow from that for me. Firstly, it's also a little bit like the experience. It's just like what a vampire would see. It's also a little bit like the experience of that headlessness that Douglas Harding talks about. Or it would be like a literal instantiation of that. I haven't read anything about the relationship between Harding's work and being a vampire, so I'm probably stretching it quite a bit here. But what Harding's work suggests, and it's a kind of approach to Zen, he refers to himself as an approach to Zen, is that by imagining, or taking the evidence of your senses literally, that you can't see your own head, you take that literally, therefore your head mustn't exist. And from that follows a series of exercises to get you to occupy mental space in a slightly different way, in a way which is interesting. It's associated with things like enlightenment. But presumably, if you're also doing this headless exercise, and the headless exercise somehow magically becomes real, when you look in the mirror, well, I guess you might see a torso with no head on the top of it. But it'd be more interesting, I think, if you saw nothing. I think that would be more in the spirit of what Harding, I'm not right down, more in the spirit of what Harding's talking about. Because he's not really interested in people not having any head, he's really interested in people not being embodied. Hello there. So I think this thing about being in Paul Sermon's installation, or being a vampire, is also a little bit like being headless in the Douglas Harding sense of the word. Something very interesting about vampires, I think. I mean, they're the subject of horror, so they've got a lot of trappings associated with them. But a lot of the weirdness is about them, like the fact they can't see their reflections in mirrors, and the fact that crosses kill them, which I think must be a Hammer House of Horror add-on to the original legends, but I think it's a really interesting set of properties, that. Because certainly this thing about not being able to see yourself in a mirror, as I've already kind of intimated with its relationship with Harding, it suggests a kind of stepping outside of the loop of self-representation and an identification with a different kind of world, really, a different kind of worldview, a different kind of phenomenology, which, if you were taking vampires literally, that's the kind of phenomenology they'd have to inhabit. They would feel themselves at the centre of the world the whole time. They would never see themselves represented anywhere. They would only ever see their body from the chest down, as you say. They'd never see their own head. It's always amazing to me that vampires have got well-groomed hair and nicely trimmed beards. I don't know how they would do that. But the fact they're not represented anywhere, they don't appear in the landscape of their own consciousness outside of themselves. There's never that there's never that re-entry point for themselves into the world, in the way that representations of ourselves in mirrors act for non-vampires. And here I guess I'm just leaning slightly on Lacan, who talks about the mirror stage in human development. It's the point when you're a child and you see yourself in a mirror and to kind of misrecognize yourself, he says. But that misrecognition in Lacan, or how I'm kind of thinking of as a kind of conceptual phenomenological re-entry loop, where you see yourself as an object in the world and identify, rightly or wrongly, with that point. Vampires are constructively deprived of that. They don't have that loop. I'll have to think about that related to crosses later on, I think, and garlic. I think there is a legend, actually, I may be wrong here, but I think there is a legend about how to kill a vampire which involves cutting the head off. I think you cut the head off and put garlic in the neck or something. I'll have to look at that when I get on.